Europe's rivers are shrinking, and as the water pulls back, things that have been hidden for decades are appearing again. Nazi warships, unexploded bombs, ancient ruins, even the bones of a woolly mammoth. But Europe is only the beginning. Around the world, disappearing water has uncovered entire towns, murder victims, lost cities, and vehicles with people still inside. Some were hidden for decades, others for thousands of years. These are the creepiest things found when the water disappeared. There are warships sitting at the bottom of the Danube, and in 2026, the river became shallow enough to see them again. Near the Serbian town of Prahovo, rusted German military vessels began emerging from the mud. They have been there since 1944, when Nazi Germany was retreating from the advancing Soviet army. The ships could not escape, so the Germans sank them themselves. Dozens of vessels were deliberately scuttled across the river to block navigation and keep them out of enemy hands. Many went down carrying ammunition, weapons, and explosives. For decades, the Danube kept most of them hidden, then drought exposed the wrecks again. Rusted hulls, command sections, pieces of machinery, entire ships slowly appearing where open water used to be, and some may still be dangerous. Explosives remain a concern, while the wrecks themselves squeeze modern cargo ships into an increasingly narrow navigation channel. More than 80 years after the war ended, part of Hitler's fleet is still exactly where the Germans left it. The river just usually hides it. And warships are not the only things the disappearing water has uncovered. At Lake Mead on the Nevada-Arizona border in the United States, the shrinking shoreline revealed something much smaller: a barrel. In May 2022, visitors near Hemingway Harbor noticed a rusted metal drum sticking out of the mud. Inside were human remains. Investigators determined the victim was a man. He had been shot. His clothing and shoes suggested he died sometime between the mid-1970s and early 1980s. The barrel had likely been sitting underwater for decades. When it was dumped, the location may have been around 100 feet beneath the surface. That made it a good place to hide a body, until the lake started disappearing. As drought pushed Lake Mead lower and lower, the shoreline moved far enough for the barrel to emerge. Police reopened the case as a homicide investigation and later produced a facial reconstruction of the victim. His identity is still unknown. Lake Mead would reveal several sets of human remains as the water continued falling, but this one was different. Someone had deliberately placed a murdered man inside a barrel and trusted the lake to keep the secret. For decades it did. Not everything revealed by disappearing water is recent. Some things were already ancient before the first pyramids were built. In central Spain, the Valdecañas Reservoir hides a massive ring of prehistoric stones known as the Dolmen of Guadalperal. It was built around 5000 BCE, roughly 7,000 years ago. For most of its existence, it stood on dry land. Then, in 1963, engineers flooded the valley to create a reservoir. The monument disappeared beneath the water. For decades, only small parts appeared during unusually dry years. Then came the drought of 2022. The reservoir dropped to around 28% of capacity, and the entire monument emerged. Dozens of giant stones stood exposed across the dry reservoir bed. The site became known as the Spanish Stonehenge, although archaeologists believe it was probably a burial or ceremonial complex. Researchers rushed to document it before the water returned, because that is what makes the place so strange. A monument survived thousands of years of weather, war, and human history. Then modern engineering put it underwater. Now drought is the only reason we get to see it. Sometimes disappearing water does more than reveal history. Sometimes it solves a disappearance. In December 2023, a 54-year-old man vanished in Utah, USA. He had last been seen at a store in Kanab. Then both he and his pickup truck disappeared. Months passed. Then more than a year. No truck, no confirmed trace of the man. But Lake Powell was getting lower. By 2025, drought had pushed the water roughly 20 feet below where it had been when he disappeared. Then people near Lone Rock Beach noticed something just beneath the surface: the outline of a vehicle. Authorities recovered the pickup. It belonged to the missing man. Inside were human remains. At the time of recovery, officials had not yet publicly confirmed the identity of the remains, and investigators were still determining exactly what happened. But one thing was clear: for almost 2 years, the truck had been sitting beneath the lake. Searchers had looked for a missing man. The lake had been holding the answer the entire time. It just had to fall far enough to show it. A single truck can disappear under a reservoir, so can an entire city. In 2022, extreme drought hit Iraq. Water was urgently needed for crops, so large amounts were released from the Mosul reservoir. As the water level dropped, stone and mud brick walls began appearing from beneath the surface. They belonged to a city around 3,400 years old. Archaeologists believe the site may be ancient Zakiku, an important center of the Mitanni Empire. Problem was time. No one knew when the reservoir would fill again, so a Kurdish-German archaeological team rushed to the site and began an emergency excavation. They uncovered massive defensive walls, towers, a palace, a multi-story storage building, an industrial complex. Some walls still stood several meters high despite spending decades underwater. Then came something even more remarkable: clay vessels containing cuneiform tablets. Some of the tablets were still sealed inside their original envelopes. The team documented as much as possible, then covered the ruins with protective material and gravel. Soon after, the water returned. The ancient city disappeared again. The Danube's 2026 drought exposed things from the Second World War. Then it exposed something from an entirely different world: a woolly mammoth. As the river dropped along Bulgaria, newly exposed sections of sediment became accessible. Among them were mammoth remains. Animals like this once wandered across Ice Age Europe long before cities existed along the Danube. Rivers are constantly cutting through layers of ancient sediment, which is why fossils and prehistoric bones can sometimes end up trapped beneath modern riverbeds. Usually the water keeps those layers hidden. In 2026, it did not, and the result created one of the strangest images of the drought. On the same river system revealing 20th century warships and unexploded weapons, people were also finding bones left behind by an animal from the Ice Age. Thousands of years of history, stacked in the same mud, and all it took to expose them was for the river to shrink. Imagine leaving your home because someone tells you the entire village is about to disappear underwater. That happened in Aceredo, Spain. In 1992, residents were forced to leave as the Alto Lindoso reservoir began filling. The water rose over roads, then homes, then nearly the entire village. For the next 30 years, Aceredo existed beneath the reservoir, then drought brought it back. In early 2022, the reservoir dropped to roughly 15% of capacity. The water retreated, and people could walk through Aceredo again. Stone houses were still standing, roads reappeared, walls divided rooms that had once belonged to families. Even an old public fountain remained, with water still flowing from a rusted pipe. Tourists arrived to photograph the ghost village. Former residents came back too. For visitors, it looked like a strange ruin. For the people who once lived there, it was different. Their village had not vanished. It had been sitting there the entire time, at the bottom of a lake. But some things were deliberately left behind for the next drought. Along the Elbe River in the Czech Republic are rocks covered in dates. 1616, 1707, 1811, 1842, 1904. They are known as hunger stones. For centuries, people carved into them whenever the river dropped to dangerously low levels. Because in the past, low water did not just mean drought. It meant failed crops, expensive food, ships unable to move, people losing their livelihoods. One of the most famous stones lies near Děčín in the Czech Republic. It carries an ominous German message commonly translated as, "If you see me, weep." There is a strange twist. The old drought dates really are centuries old, but the famous warning appears to have been added much later, around 1904, probably by a local innkeeper who turned the exposed stone into a tourist attraction. The message may have been theatrical. The warning behind it was not. The stones genuinely mark centuries of severe drought, which means every time the river falls low enough for them to appear, they deliver the same message to the people standing above them. This happened before, and when it did, things went badly. And now, in 2026, some of Europe's rivers are low enough to reveal their secrets again, which raises an uncomfortable question. If the water keeps falling, what else is still down there?